we're going to show you how to replace a trailing arm on the 2021 design Landmaster UTVs. There were a select few trailing arms that were mis-welded from the factory back in early 2021. This causes the trailing arm to curve instead of being straight and level. You may notice your vehicle is pulling one direction while you're driving straight, or this could cause a rear CV shaft to pop out. Using a straight edge against the back tire, you can see if the trailing arm is crooked or not. As you move up the arm, if there is a gap getting greater, you have a mis-welded trailing arm. Here are two examples of trailing arms, one good and one bad. So let's get started on how to perform this service. First, start by jacking up the rear of the unit, then remove all four lug nuts from the wheel. Next, use a dust cover remover tool and clamp it over the dust cap. Lightly tap the tool to loosen the dust cap. Once the dust cap is removed, bend back the cotter pin and loosen the castle nut using a 15/16 inch socket. Next, use a 3/8 inch socket to remove the bolts holding the brake line onto the trailing arm. Then use a 3/4 inch socket and wrench to loosen the radius rod bolts. Remove the nuts, but keep the bolts in place to hold things together. Then, using a 17mm swivel socket and wrench, loosen the shock bolt. Once again, keep this bolt in place. Then, pull out the two bolts from the radius rods. Next, using a 9/16 inch swivel socket, loosen the two nuts and bolts on the top of the wheel casting. Leave one bolt in place to hold the wheel casting up. Next, remove the nuts and bolts on the bottom of the wheel casting. Now you can remove the top bolt and remove the entire wheel casting. Then remove the shock bolt and slide the trailing arm away from the CV shaft. If your CV shaft popped out, you should remove the CV shaft to make sure it was not damaged. Here is an example of a clip on a CV shaft that got damaged from popping out. The end is also damaged on the edges, as you can see. On a good CV shaft, the clip should freely rotate around the CV shaft as shown. You can take a look at our other video on how to remove and replace a CV shaft if you need to perform this service. Additionally, you should also make sure none of the gears inside the transaxle were stripped. Using a 1 1/16 inch long socket wrench and a 1 1/8 inch wrench, remove the nut and bolt holding the trailing arm to the chassis. It's best to remove the seat and go through the top if you're removing the trailing arm on the driver's side of the vehicle. If you are removing the passenger side trailing arm, you'll need to go underneath the vehicle to avoid the gas tank. After you remove the trailing arm, look to see if there's any thread showing on the heim joint. If there is, take a measurement of how much is shown. This way you can match it up to your new trailing arm. In this case, the heim joint end is all the way in, so no thread is showing. Now we are ready to install the new trailing arm. Screw in the heim joint to match the length of the old trailing arm. Next, take one of the brake line screws and pre-drill all the brake line holes. This will help when installing the brake line later. Now slide the trailing arm up in place and make sure you put the brake line over the trailing arm as shown. Next, hand tighten the nut onto the bolt holding the trailing arm to the chassis. We will tighten this down later on. Now, slide the trailing arm back over the CV shaft and put the shock bolt and nut in place. Then slide the wheel casting up and tighten down all 4 nuts and bolts to 30 foot-pounds of torque. Then tighten the nuts and bolts down for the radius rods to 30 foot-pounds of torque. Now start attaching the brake line back into place. After you've reattached the brake line, tighten down the shock nut and bolt to 30 foot-pounds. Then take a pry bar and wrench to straighten out the heim joint and tighten the heim joint down onto the trailing arm. Then tighten the nut and bolt of the trailing arm to 80 foot-pounds of torque. After torquing down the trailing arm, all that's left to do is mount the wheel and tighten the lugs to 65 foot-pounds of torque. After a procedure like this, it's always a good idea to check the alignment. To check and adjust alignment, follow our alignment video or view the instructions in the owner's manual. Then you're all finished. Thank you for watching this video, and we hope it was helpful to replace the trailing arm.